One of the problems with Trash or Treasure is stuff is broken. So we have a broken spring. So that will not pull the clutch down.
Please subscribe to help you and your motorcycle perform better.
Time to replace some missing subframe bolts. What a delightful discovery that was. So we were missing 2.
How much were these damn things?
I don't know.
$600 a piece?
So at this point, these are 8mm bolts. We're going to want to put a dab of grease on each one.
Not Loctite.
Nope, I never put Loctite on bolts that are coming in and out like these. There's no need. In my opinion, somebody else may differ. So at this point, I've loosened the other 2 up on the other side because this was free floating. Okay. Now we need to go back. All right. There's one. And that already started, so that was easy. So we'll tighten these 2 snug. We'll go to the other side and tighten correctly.
It's a good thing we only paid $8,000 for this bike.
Snug. Okay. All right, that takes care of that. So now our subframe is fully connected. Last odds and ends chore for the moment is going to be getting that bent bolt out. So to do that, first of all, we've got to pull the spring off. It's much easier if the kickstand is all the way up to go ahead and disconnect. So our spring puller's got a hook on it. And that hook grabs behind the spring and lifts it off the kickstand. And that doesn't want to go. That's a fight. So we'll do it the other way, which is loosen that off. And last time this took forever to get out because it was bent. Ow. So it's easy and then it tightens right up. Okay, new one. And we'll grease this appropriately because the kickstand moves around that cylinder. A little bit of grease on the thread. Take that out, put that on, then we can physically see it. And we've also got lots of wiggle room without the spring, trying to make it awkward. So okay, so that's in. So those 2 springs need to get clipped onto there, like that. And then we need those 2 to go onto there.
Okay. And now you have to use your spring puller.
come on, get out. Okay, so then tighten it up on the back. That's tight. Okay. All right, so now that's a proper bolt that isn't bent in place. To complete all of this, before we close it all up, we also have to inspect inside the cover. Oops. One of the problems with Trash or Treasure is stuff is broken. So we have a broken spring. So that will not pull the clutch down that way because the spring's broken. So you'll pull the clutch in and it's going to stay up. Okay, replacement spring that we scavenged off one of the parts bikes. So this piece, the rounded piece, rather than the tight, the rounded piece goes straight into that, like that. Now the other piece has to come and hang out and slides right over the top of that. So we got to stretch it a little bit. Don't want to get my glove caught. Which I did. I get it? I did. So, spring is correct. Now we got to seat that onto the cable, detension the spring, and then once we connect, it's going to be fine. I prefer to leave the spider web alone. I think that should stay. Okay, let's line this back up. There we go. Perfect. To finish off that whole project with a spring for the clutch bolt, and that barrel, or the thickest shoulder, fits nicely right in it. Sometimes there's a brass bushing in there, and if it's not correct, the shoulder is nowhere near wide enough and the lever floats in there. So this bolt and shoulder is made for that lever, so we're all good there. So oftentimes you'll see a clutch lever that'll float up and down. That's because it's missing the brass bushing that sometimes is inside there. So let's get this all greased up, ready to go. Got to line up the cable line with the clutch tensioner, because that gives us more or less slack, and then we've got to feed that in correctly. That went nicely through. Stay there. Thank you. And then we want to put some grease both here and there in the slot and there where the barrel goes. So all we're doing is pushing the grease in like that and push a little more grease into the barrel, not a whole lot. That's enough. So now the clutch cable, when it's seated, is fully lubed from the shoulder of the cable fitting out to where it goes into the clutch lever. So gonna need a little more cable available to us. There it is. Gonna put the clutch cable in, the barrel into the slot, and then the cable goes up inside the slot. There it is. Now we want a little grease on both sides of the lever. 1, 2, done. Then go ahead, slide it inside. There we go. go ahead and grease up the barrel. Again, not much required. You don't want to swamp it in grease. There it is. And let's locate that in. Why are we fighting here? We've got something that isn't seating correctly. That's correct. So it's not letting it push back this way. Ah, clutch pin. We see it right there. So we've got to make sure that clutch switch is in as we put the lever on. So that's got to push in
right there
and sit behind this. So let's do that all over again. In. So clutch starts to come in, push the pin in, there it is, and there's the fit. Ta-da!
That's the doodad that won't let it start unless you pull in the clutch.
There we go. Then once you've got it going, use the 8 and seat it. Sometimes people will put a washer on the shoulder just because it's a nice broader fit, and you can see in the past it's had a washer on it. So totally up to you if you want to do that. Not a big deal. But that's ready now to get seated and have the nut put on the bottom. So the first thing we got to check, because it's seated, is how much free play do we have, and we have that much. So question is, do we take all that slop up and leave this against the stop here on the clutch side down at the end where we just put the spring on, or do we use this adjusting wheel to send it all the way backwards to take up the slop? Usually when you've got a ton like that, you go down to the bottom. You can see the lock nut there. You loosen the lock nut and then you turn that thread as you're looking at it counterclockwise, which will elongate or increase the amount of threads showing. So we take up the slop here first before we do that there. So let's get a 12 and get that taken care of. So correction on that, 10 millimeters, not 8. That's seated but not tight. We still have the same amount of play. So we'll loosen the lock nut. Now we're going to make the amount of threads showing increase, and to do that we're going to move the adjuster counterclockwise. There isn't a whole lot of room in here, so we don't want to fight that. Now, when we've done a couple of turns, literally, so 12 faces of the hex, then we'll go back up top and see where we're at. Because what we don't want to do is make the clutch cable tight. One more. Okay. So we had a huge gap before, now we're down to that. So we can go 6 more faces and call it good on the bottom, and then we'll use the wheel on the top to finish it. 4, 5, and 6. Bring that down. Tighten that one up on the lock nut. Okay. Now let's make sure we're good up top. You want about 2 to 3 millimeters. So that's a little bit more than we need. So let's bring the adjusting wheel back a little bit. That's about right there. So always take the slack up if you can, depending on the way your motorcycle's arranged. At the other end of your clutch cable on the engine end, always take it up there if you can first, then adjust here. Now if you run out on the bottom and you've reached obviously 2/3 to 3/4 of the adjuster's total length, then you need a new cable. Because when you go up here and you still have a ton of slop left and you get this thing hanging out 2 to 3/4, order a new cable and get that swapped out as soon as you can. Now with the spring in place and a good spring off the parts bike, it just snaps everything right back. So we've got to get a tennis ball or racquetball, do lots of squeezing and stretching so our forearm gets up to strength for our clutch lever now. So now we have to go ahead, put the lock nut on the bottom of the thread, holding the clutch lever in place. This is blind, so you've got to feel it. And if you can't feel it, the easy thing to do is go ahead and unscrew this and then screw it into the nut while you've got it in position. That's going just fine right now. Okay. Yep. That's tight, so now you've got to double up on the top and then snug the lock nut into place without allowing the top to move. Okay, done. Now remember what I was saying about a wobbly clutch lever? Very little free play there at all. When that when the brass bushing is missing, this goes up and down like a yo-yo. So TPS switch came off a vendor online, world famous for repairing TPSs. So what we've got to do is put it back. So we have a slot for the flat blade to go into here. And it would appear inside, when we looked at it carefully, that it's a straight shot all the way to the bottom. But there's a metal piece that's probably part of, in here, a servo motor that is just ever so slightly not perfectly aligned. So we've got to line this up first to get it squared up so that it can go on. There it is. So it's moving. Now, that seems to be seated. There it is. Boom.
Oh, it slipped in.
Ta-da!
Man, the magic man.
So, very gently, a little pressure, put it into position, and that was that little shelf back here that I was talking about that was clearly just ever so slightly offset. And two, now I'll go get my fillet. Nope, it's right there. Mr. Williams had it prepared.
I mean, technically, these aren't Phillips. There's some
JAS.
weird thing from...
We need the correct screwdriver from Japan for Japanese screws. So all of you that said we're using the wrong screwdriver, damn it, I'm adding the cost of these JIS screwdrivers into the cost of the build. So we now have Japanese Phillips screwdrivers to use specifically on our Japanese motorcycle. So I hope you're all sitting there feeling very smug with yourself. That's tight. And that's tight. Okay, so now that's secure. Let's go ahead and secure our wiring. So there's number one. Snap her in. Click. Now the little finger torch piece back here. There's that. Now bring it up. Click. Now as we basically put fresh oil in the forks, slapped them back on, so we had a roller and ran it around the garage and transported it, etc. Other side's fine, but we have a bit of a leak here. So I'm going to save the oil because it's brand new oil, and then I'm going to only replace this seal. The other one's perfectly fine, there's no issue to replace it at all. The other part is this seal may have dirt in it, so before I tear it all completely to pieces, if I find nothing but dirt in here, then at that point I'm going to go ahead and obviously change the seal. So as we deconstruct this fork only, we'll see why we have an issue here.
Yeah, because it's leaking all the way down on...
Oh yeah, it's all the way down. It's all wet. So when we plugged the dash in, it started to come back and it didn't, and then it went away and it came back some more, so we're just going to replace it. There are two bolts at the base. There's one here, and then, oops, there's one right there. Okay, so that's those two out. Pull and pull. There we've got our harness connection, which goes all the way around the back here and comes out this side. So all we've got to do is disconnect here to remove the old dash, and there's the connector right there that you just push in. So let's see if we can get that out. Yep. New dash connected. There it is. All right, let's put the rubber cover back on, just for the time being. Okay. Key, power on, yes. Fully lights up.
Cha-ching.
So we are good to go with the stash. So reassembly can continue. Freshly cleaned, got rid of a year's worth of dust. Our headlight is ready to install. Note the tab. Note the missing paint. Tab must go where missing paint is. So seat that, find the spot, and it locks right in. Seat the top bolt first. Takes a second because you've got to wiggle it and get everything set correctly, and you've got to start it by hand. Come on. There. Nope, missed it. There it goes. So top bolt is in. We're going to do that 3 or 4 threads. Now we can go for the bottom bolt. So now let's go ahead and seat those. Again, cautiously. If it bites, then we want to be careful. We don't want to cross thread. That's moving in nice and slowly. Okay. Tighten. Tighten. Okay. So we're done there. Let's put that back straight. Now the headlight's in and we got floppy wiring. So what do we do with this stuff? Well, there's 2 pieces that form that little rectangle. Obviously, the headlight attachment comes out this side. This is your turn signal for this side. Then we've got the flat piece that sits like this, coming across on the other side to the main harness. It makes it easy just for now to go ahead and sit it on top of the air dam there, so it's just supported for the time being. So when we originally fired it up, we used distilled water and dropped all the coolant out of it, just because to put something in there and keep as much contaminants out of the coolant that was in there originally. So it's been a year. We just dumped the water and there isn't a spot of rust in it whatsoever. So there was obviously some remnants of coolant in the system, which is no surprise whatsoever. And because this was going to be a track bike, that's why we put distilled water in it. So it's got to be changed, ready for being used again. So at this point, changing the coolant and putting fresh in, and then pulling out probably after about 6 to 8 hours. We'll do it again. But it's so nice to see not a drop of rust coming out of it. So the last time we started it up, it leaked water and we weren't sure why. So closer inspection, our filler cap area is actually out of round, and the sealing surfaces cannot possibly seal correctly because they're also not flat. So the easiest thing to do, rather than go spend ages at a radiator repair shop and see if they could give us a new neck here and put that on so that we could do that, even after 3 different caps, 2 new, it still wouldn't seal. So the easiest thing to do is take one off a bike that we know works, seals correctly, go ahead, put it on, fire it up, bleed it, no leaks. So the radiator change, what the problem was this. So now that we have that done, it runs idles, everything's good. We've got to see if we can get this fixed rather than throw a perfectly good radiator away. And if we can get it fixed, that's great, because that's a big saving for us in having a spare. So radiator's done, fluid's back up to the low line here. We'll run it again up to temp, and because it was filled again once it reached temp and the fan came on and cooled off, so we just want to check that we've got all the fluids at the correct levels. So now we know our radiator is safe, functions, seals, and we're good to go.